Welcome back to another episode of the Frustrated CEO podcast. My name is Patrick Lyons. I'm your host, and I'm here with my two fabulous colleagues, Patsy Feeman. Patsy, hello.
Hello.
And Leb Tannenbaum. How are you, sir?
Hey there, Patrick. Patsy.
Great to have you. And great to have you, listener, back for the final episode in our three-part series called Fixing Bad Company Culture. Now, we're not going to rehash the entire episode 1 and episode 2. Those are both available in the podcast library, but we encourage you to go back and listen. Episode 1, we talked about what is culture, why is it important, and where do you begin in the process of fixing bad company culture. And in episode 2, we talked about two important aspects of your organization that are both inputs into your organization culture, and they are affected by the other aspects of your organization culture. And so today, we're going to finish this series by talking about two more important aspects of your business, two pretty significant chunks of what you do on a daily basis, on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, that again are inputs into your culture, meaning when they're working well, or frankly, when they're not working well, that's going to have an impact on your culture. And because of their interaction with the other aspects of your business, when the other aspects of your organization are working well or not working well, that will have an influence on the two that we're going to talk about today. Those two are, first and foremost, the people quadrant, right? People obviously make up a significant chunk of your business. It's likely your most expensive asset or liability in both senses. But the people are a significant aspect of your organization culture. And as we talked about in episode 1, episode 14, episode 1 of this series, a lot of times when people think culture, they think just the people. Culture is much more than people, but today we are going to dig into the impact that people have on your culture and how your people are impacted by what else is going on in your culture. And then the second big chunk of your business we're going to talk about today is simply your culture's ability to adapt. How adaptable is your organization? So, Lab, I'm going to throw the first question to you.
Okay.
Today is we're still navigating through this crazy pandemic. Leaders initially thought when they sent everybody home from their physical workspace, they sent them home thinking, we have to get through this, and then we're going to bring everybody back into our existing real estate. Well, I think leaders are figuring out that's not going to happen. In some cases it is, but in many organizations, they're now trying to figure out how do we keep our people, how do we lead our people in this hybrid space? So what have you seen that is working? And what have you seen that maybe isn't working? What gives you concerns about how organizations are investing in their people in this VUCA hybrid virtual world that we're working in today?
It's a great question. I know it's being talked about a lot. I think, when we talk about investing in our people, the thing that we're seeing that seems to matter, one of the things that matters the most and has a greater impact on the culture is whether our people are growing. So are we capability development, leadership development, team development, whatever it might be, personal development, maybe skill development in a particular area. People don't want to be stagnant. People are looking around to see if there's something better. So, when we recognize that, so it used to be perhaps all in-person kind of opportunities for development, or a lot of it, different trainings, different ways of offering development, whether it's leadership, team, personal skill. And there was this hesitation. And this question also, it's also a financial question. It's like, are we financially able, ready, willing to invest in our people with so much uncertainty? And what I'd say in general is do it. Yes, it's worth it. The return on the investment is there. And we know that it's impacting the talent that you can attract, and it's impacting the talent that you'll retain. So, I'll give one example and then maybe pass it back to both of you. We were invited to participate in with a leadership, uh, a pretty storied leadership development program in an organization that's been serving the transportation industry for 100 years. And in their history, they had never been forced to some degree, offer this program uh, virtually, right? So that's a pretty big decision to make. And these people are nominated into the program. It's a storied program, and one of the beliefs. And so it also is kind of cool because you have to look at your beliefs. What do you believe about your people? But one of the beliefs was that some of the greatest value people got was networking with each other in person. What happened after, the different modules were covered, and here we are looking at doing this whole entire thing virtually. And I think it was a pretty courageous decision, but they decided to and do it, to engage and offer this type of development to leaders in the transportation industry all over the country. And what I can say about it is that not only did it work, I think it surprised everybody, including ourselves, to see how engaging you can make virtual capability development be, and that people are still longing, as an example, for community, right? And so this opportunity to mix it up with people who are, in your industry, but in other parts of the country, facing some really strong similar problems, but also some unique problems, and learn from each other and learn from whatever content's being offered. So I am convinced that those people went back as culture builders. I am convinced that they went back more excited than they had been before they came, with and we knew in the course of this 5-week program that they were going back each week and sharing with members of their team. What do you think about this? Or I learned that, or you should read this, or, all of that was happening. It's not much different than might have happened if everyone was in person. So in terms of that aspect of culture, I think it's as important as it's ever been, maybe more important. And yes, it's different, but a lot of things are different. And I'm a big believer in it, whether it's an ebook, a podcast to listen to. And the last thing I'd say is those people, when they were in this program, were not doing their day-to-day work. So part of the investment isn't even to think of it financially. It's giving your people the space, the time to listen to a podcast and know that they're not. That's part of the job. That's part of our culture, is that we want to grow and share ideas and learn together. And that's a big deal.
Yeah. It's interesting, in talking with a VP of HR recently, she was lamenting the fact that they've suitcased in a number of different training programs for employees, specifically in response to what the employees have asked for. Employees said, we want training for this. And so she and her team have gone out and gotten it and brought it in, and yet they are poorly attended. And there was frustration, obviously frustrated leaders trying to figure out what the assumption is, well, they didn't really want it, or there's a natural tendency to, it's like, oh, why do we even bother when you actually ask the employees, why didn't you go? They talked about feeling short-staffed. They talked about feeling like, okay, I know my manager told me I could go, but when I look around my team, everybody's so overloaded. I just felt like I couldn't. So they're making their own internal decisions. They're not being denied going, but they're making a decision because they don't want to. It's like the survivor's guilt kind of thing. Like, I don't want to go to the training and make it that much more difficult for my team. And so you're right. There has to be not just a verbal commitment from the leadership to the importance of training, bringing it in, putting the resources behind it, but then making sure people have the time and that they prioritize it above the day-to-day.
Well, in one way, I was going to add a few minutes ago, one way that I see that is becoming more effective is that when people are learning new tools, they're learning new tools in the context of their real work environment. What are the daily, weekly challenges they're facing, both within themselves and with the people they manage? And how do you support them? So if they have one-on-ones, if they have a mentor, if they have other ways of integrating and embedding the learning into their growth. And the other thing I've seen recently is when it ties to what my career goals are, then I'm much more likely to opt in because somebody's taking care of me. And in this wacky world where I don't know hardly anybody that is not looking to hire additional employees, these are some key points that people want to know. I'm not only going to get the training, but it's going to be in alignment with where I want my career path to go, and I'm going to get the support to go there.
Yeah. I'm taking notes for our Let's Get Practical at the end. So, listener, if you are new to our podcast, at the end of every episode, we recap kind of the key points and specific things, actions that you can take to make inroads in your organization starting tomorrow. So stay tuned for that at the end. Leb, what other aspects of the people are measurable inputs to your organization culture?
A lot of organizations initially struggled when the pandemic hit. As an example, to think of how we're going to do as in teams, right? So a lot of organizations, whether we're talking about pre-pandemic or in the pandemic, when asked the question, are we set up to operate in teams? Said, yeah, absolutely. And I think what we've known before pre-pandemic or before the pandemic is that some of those weren't really teams. Some of those were functional work groups. Some of those didn't have a unified goal. Some of those were, they didn't have enough meeting rhythm to develop themselves as a team. Or maybe there were skills missing, whatever the case may be. But I think the question is still on the table, and it has an impact on your culture. So most organizations are, if you look at their functional chart, most of them are organized in such a way that you would assume, there are teams here. There's teams in finance, or there's in these different functions. So now it raises the question in terms of culture is, well, how do we operate in teams when we're not in the same room together, or we're not in the same building together? And is it something that and I think it's probably one of the things that has frustrated and actually caused some CEOs and leaders to be fearful. It's like, oh man, how do we do this? And is it going to work? And are people going to share those little tidbits of information that they might have shared in the hall? What's the appropriate meeting rhythm? But what I'd say in general is that's a conversation that you have with your teams. That's an organizational kind of conversation. It's a conversation about ultimately your culture. If it's still important, we'll find a way. If it flushes out that we never really functioned that well in teams when we were together, why would we expect it to be any different because we're on Zoom or whatever platform we're on? I think it's pretty cool. So if the culture is curious and values teaming, then I think that culture is going to find a way. So I'll pause there for a moment.
So one question I have, you mentioned earlier that there are some organizations that think they function well as teams when really they are functional work groups. instead. Can you articulate what's the difference? So if I'm listening and I want to know, I want to try to assess my own organization, what's the difference between a team and a functional work group?
Well, just generally, and if you go back to The Wisdom of Teams as an example, the book The Wisdom of Teams by Katzenberg, the functional work group doesn't necessarily have a unified goal. So let's look at the way an acquisition due diligence might be done, right? So you might have a quote unquote team of people, and the person in finance is doing financial due diligence. The person in technology is doing technology due diligence. There's some, people due diligence happening, but they're all doing it in more or less a silo. And then they turn in that compiled information and hand it over to someone who might be making a decision about whether this is an acquisition we should do or not. So they're not really a team, and they actually don't stay together after that acquisition is looked at or that due diligence is done. They go back to their original location. So that's one thing, I think, and then there are teams that actually operate like a work group because they haven't really defined a common goal and something that is a stretch or something that's inspiring, right? So that's a whole other piece, and we'll get into empowerment, whether people feel empowered or not. But there are so many ways that teams can function at a reasonable level, a low level, or everyone is looking for. Can we develop as a high performance team? And it isn't just about talent. So what is it? But in terms of culture, if we're valuing teaming. What I like about what's going on is everyone's had to kind of relook at meeting rhythm and relook at, there's collaboration software, there's good collaboration software out now. But that doesn't necessarily mean if I have a beef with Patsy that I'm going to collaborate with her, right? Or, if I am uncertain about Patrick, maybe I'm not going to share some information with Patrick. Those are some of the things, also characteristics of how a team turns into a work group. They're shielded in some way, or they're withholding in some way, or you can't be honest in some way, or you can't be emotional in some way, and it holds the team back and maybe puts you into low function or work group mode.
Yeah. Thank you. Good. Patsy, when you think about empowerment, because Lev mentioned empowerment, you've done a lot of work with next level leaders. You were also on the ENO project that Lev was mentioning earlier, right? That professional development for a number of folks in different organizations. What have you seen or heard on how employees are feeling about empowerment, or how this virtual space, or even if because that's not the only thing impacting business, right? The shortage of talent is impacting business, just the current state of business. What are you seeing, and how it's impacting employee empowerment?
Well, recently I was talking to two new hires of a small regional company, and they had been on board 30 to 45 days, and they were still unclear about what their role and responsibilities in the organization were. So, very foundational, get very clear about, why you're hiring somebody and have them know that that's why they're being hired. So
were they brought on in virtually, or was it not a failure, but was it a symptom of that company hasn't adjusted their onboarding to account for a virtual start, or
no, I think it was just more that it's not an established standard practice, consistent established practice across all departments.
Yeah.
And when you don't cross somebody in the hallway, it only I've heard from several people, well, I was hired and then I'm off and running. I'm off and running. And when you're off and running in a virtual world, you can be off and running in the wrong direction because there's nobody there to say. So I think you have to be, which we're going to see over and over again, I think you have to be more cognizant of the attention you need to pay in this virtual world, this hybrid world.
Mm-hmm. That triggers for me a couple of things. One is going back to teams is, yes, it's great we see each other without masks on, but we only see basically our heads and shoulders. And it's not as easy to read body language as it is when you're together, right? So some guidelines, we refer to some of this as, cast a safety net, make sure that it's okay for people to feel that they can speak up or ask a question, or, I can ask, hey, Patrick, are you okay? Or is something else going on in the background that you want to bring to the foreground? And if that's not established, that impacts the culture, it impacts team function. And some people are going through a lot to be able to work at home, right? And to me, that also brings up, this whole notion is tied to empowerment. I feel empowered when people listen to me. I don't mean just like from a podcast perspective. I mean, just, in a work setting, I feel empowered when, people are not interrupting when they're listening, or, really when they're listening in a kind of more deep or compassionate way. Like, I really want to understand what's going on for you. I think people feel empowered when that's happening. It may be a little bit more difficult right now, but the leaders that are guiding their culture to be, a great culture are probably listening more than they've ever listened before. And so maybe there's a key there, is like, are you listening? Do you take the time to really understand your people and what's going on for your people? In our work with Dennison Consulting and their data in terms of empowerment, which is a really big word, and it ties up with something that Patsy was saying, is people feel empowered when they understand their role and what level they can make decisions at. Right. So I want to know. I want to know what my role and responsibility is, and I want to know that I can make these kinds of decisions. And I want to know where I need to go if I'm not sure that I can make that decision. Right. And some of that got a little hard to see because we're not in the same building together.
Right.
Right. So that's a whole other thing, is just clarity around the decision making. And the other thing that, their data shows is that people want information in a timely manner. And that means you have to be more intentional about communication. Right. And all of us have been saying to all the leaders we're working with is like, over communicate, even if it feels like you've already communicated, over communicate, so that people feel informed.
Yeah, you love that. You nailed that. If you think about why people feel disempowered, very often it's because you hear this from employees, really at all levels of the organization. It can even be leaders who feel that they just are not empowered, and it usually falls into one of those two categories. It falls into the category of I have the information that I need to make the decision, but I don't have the authority. That's frustrating. Like, I could make this decision. We could move on. We could fix this problem and keep going, but I don't have the authority, and therefore I'm stuck, right? That's a feeling of disempowerment. Or the opposite, when, okay, I'm being told I can make this decision, but I can't get the information that I need in order to make a good decision, in order to feel good about the decision that I want to make. That's just as disempowering. And, of course, if you lack both of those, well, then you might as well just throw your resume out there and get another job. But so as a leader, if you're thinking, I want to empower my people, how do I empower my people? It's providing clarity to everybody. This is the authority that you have. This is the authority granted to this position, to this individual in the organization. And what information do you need in order to make those decisions? And how do we make sure that you're getting that information? in the phrase you used, in a timely manner, so that you're not just sitting there going, I can't get what I need. That's frustrating. It's frustrating to anybody.
Right. Well, and especially if you're a team lead, right? Because you can't necessarily guide the team in an accurate way, or you can, as Patsy said, you could be running in the wrong direction.
Right.
And you're doing your best and you're running in the wrong direction, or there's a piece of really important information and you don't have it yet.
Right.
And so, yes, emphasis on communication. And, there's a whole lot more, obviously. I think woven into all of that is better understanding, maybe better sensitivity, maybe better recognition of diversity, of equity and inclusion, of all of those kinds of things that also are important, and running through the way we learn, what we learn, the way we function in teams, whether we feel empowered or not, whether we feel listened to or not, whether we're in the information flow that we need for whatever it is we're responsible for. I think that runs through this as well.
Agreed. Okay, let's turn our attention to that last big area, that last big input into your organization culture, and that is your company's ability, your culture's ability to adapt. There are some internal aspects to this, and there are some external aspects to your ability to adapt. Lev, where do you want to pick one? Where do you want to start? When you think about a company's ability to adapt, I realize I'm giving you a very broad opportunity, but when you think of a company's ability to adapt and how that impacts the organization culture, where does your mind go first?
Well, I think the word change comes up, right? And I think that it actually goes to, what beliefs are actually allowing us to adapt, and what beliefs are inhibiting our ability to stay flexible and adapt. I think I remember in the very beginning of the pandemic helping CEOs with their communication, recognizing they weren't going to see their people in person, and there was too much fear in the communication. And it was kind of like, you're going to start at 8 a.m. and you're going to be on that computer until 6 p.m. and you're going to take, this time, and, you're going to, and, they had never worked at home before, perhaps, and maybe they had kids. I mean, it was just, so whatever the beliefs are, for us about change, about, that comes up for me as important. And, so this whole notion, John Carter wrote a book called Leading Change, and leading change is a different context than managing change. So that also comes up for me. It's like we're talking to the frustrated CEO, we're talking to senior level people, and while some of this may be frustrating, you're still needing to lead change, right? And not just kind of like manage your people to their desk or their Zoom capability. So I think it comes up to me as this is an important area of investigation and work for leaders. And in some of the leaders that we're coaching and that I'm working with, it's like, yeah, you need to look in the mirror. And if you're holding rigid to certain things that aren't really going to move that culture and that organization and your people forward or help them stretch in some ways, then the work starts at home. It starts with you. So those are the initial things that come up for me.
I love that you said look in the mirror, because whenever I get asked the question, how do you change an organization culture? My answer is always one mirror at a time.
I love
one
that.
mirror at a time, because you'll drive yourself nuts trying to get anybody else in the organization to do anything. But if you start in the mirror, and ask, where have I lowered the bar? How can I up my game? I think what you're talking about there, that leadership adaptability to be able to lead change ties right back into what we were just talking about with capability development, right? The ability to grow the skills. So as leaders, a lot of times we're thinking, how do I grow the employees? How do I grow their skills? As a leadership team, how are you growing and developing? How are you adjusting your skills, right? Because none of us has fully arrived. And in fact, an organization that I'm working with right now, their CEO is challenging everybody in the C-suite, everybody on that CEO's team, to rethink leadership now that the landscape has changed. When the pandemic first hit and state mandates made everybody go home, and a lot of leaders thought, we just have to get through this. We just have to manage through this as best we can. And then everybody will come back together into these four walls, and we will continue to lead and manage the way we did before because we know how to do that. But now, in a lot of companies, in a lot of organizations, that's not happening. They're not all coming back 5 days a week. They may not even, in fact, we've had some of our CEO guests come on and say, yeah, we're kind of staggering it, so we may never have more than 50 to 60% of our workforce in the building at one time. So as a leader, that old way of leading, I know how to lead everybody when they're in one building. That doesn't work for me anymore. I now have to figure out, how do I lead the ones that are here and the ones that are not here? How do I do that simultaneously? How do I change my communication? How do I be more intentional and not just sit down and become a victim of circumstance and say, well, we just have to keep trying to do it the old way in this new model. That's not going to work. You have to, your own capability and development, your own skills as a leader have to change, and your thinking has to change. You cannot lead in today's environment the way you maybe had been leading for years and years, 18 plus months ago.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's not just a pandemic, right? I mean, we've had scorching weather and people displaced. We've had, vaccine mandates or not. We've had masking. It's been a tough time. And if it also causes you to look at, well, how do I lead with integrity, but at the same time be flexible and understand that, we may not believe the same things, but we may believe in our vision. We may believe in our mission. We may believe in our strategy to be successful together. And maybe that's just more important than individual differences. So yeah, it's a big topic. It's a big deal. And the other thing is, and I'm kind of moving into another category, is how is our culture responding to our customers? Because our customers are going through a lot as well. And are we listening with the same empathy that we are listening to our people? Or are we listening to our customers with more empathy than we're listening to our people? But the customers have been affected, and maybe they're different. There's been industries that have been disrupted, like what Uber's done with taxis and whatnot. Well, this is a disruption shared by the entire globe. Some of these things, including this global supply chain piece.
Exactly.
So what's the effect on our customers?
Well, and just as like you were talking earlier when we were talking about team development, harnessing differences of our teammates, not all customers are made alike. So I've got a client that one customer is going gangbusters, and then they have another customer that's kind of like, not moving at all. So you've got to listen. Talk about listening. You've got to meet your customers where they're at. You've got to listen to them for where they're at that place. So it's not a one size fits all. So the skills we each need as we listen to our customers are expanding also.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Yeah, and what comes to mind there again, I think that's the point of this whole series is all of these things work together. They all integrate, right? Your people and your adaptability, and as we talked in the previous episodes about the foundation of the home, foundation of the business, those aspects, it all works together. So when you're talking about needing to listen to the voice of the customer, and just 10 minutes ago, 15 minutes ago, you were talking about the importance of communication and sharing information so that people feel empowered. One of the things that one of the missed opportunities that we see that a listener might be seeing in his or her organization is the customer information is collected by and owned by and sometimes hoarded by our sales team or our marketing team, and that information doesn't get cascaded down into the foundation of our organization where product development is, or where the technology teams might be that have to ultimately serve the customer or create the products to serve. So how do you make sure that you are sharing whatever you're finding out? It goes back to empowerment. If you have employees who are in need of that customer information, that if they had that information, it would help them make better decisions for themselves or the team, ultimately in support of the customer. If they don't get that, that's going to impact their ability to feel empowered. So it all works together. It's not just gathering. Yes, it's listening, it's gathering, and then it's cascading that information, communicating it, sharing it to everybody within the organization.
Yeah.
And then ideally, when that's done, then it starts because you've developed a culture that's a learning organization. Then everybody in the organization feels empowered to share what they're seeing.
Right.
And so then it starts to work back up, and then it becomes a kind of a living. Culture is not a one and done. It's an organic. It has to be tended to moment by moment.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and that brings up the whole notion also of in a learning organization, whether it's okay to make mistakes and learn from them, or even you mentioned it earlier, Patrick. There are some industries and probably some parts of companies, and not some whole aspects of companies that are really stretched to make everything work, and you can only overwork for so long, right? And then the learning drops off, or like that example of, well, yes, I wanted to take the training, but I didn't feel that I could because other people around me are working as hard as they're working, or
Right.
So again, it needs that integration where people are cheering you to go to learn something and come back, in whatever it is, 90 minutes, and they got it, as opposed to, no, they don't have it. We're barely making everything hold together or work. So it's just that impacts your culture. So then it depends on how long. Maybe there are periods of time where everybody's stretched, but is that going to be the permanent part of the permanent DNA of our culture?
Right.
Right. Hope not. I saw on Glassdoor today that they were advertising here's like the best 100 most flexible companies that you might want to apply to because they're so flexible. And that's just the one aspect, part of what we're talking about today.
Adaptability.
Yeah. Adaptability, flexibility, probably, really good listeners. So all of that, comes together. And I think, Patsy's labeled it well. I mean, everybody to some degree needs a part of their DNA needs to be about learning, having a learning organization. Because the other thing is the global aspects, whether it be looking at the pandemic, whether it be looking at the supply chain issues, we are starting to recognize we're really impacting each other, and certainly the climate. You know, it's not just one part of the world where climate change is affecting, dramatically how people function.
Yeah. So one last area that I think of when we're talking about that the culture's ability to adapt, change, and embedded in there, to me, the word learn. How do we learn and grow and change and evolve? And I'll preface this by harking back to Mark Williams when he joined us a number of episodes ago, and he's got that saying on his wall: if you're not making mistakes, you're not working. Right? He's a big believer in, by people aren't making mistakes, that's a problem. I need to go figure out why. Why are we not making mistakes? So yes, that there's a lot of validity to that, but we don't, as an organization, want to make the same mistakes over and over and over. We want to try to make new mistakes. So, Lab, what is the what is it when with that as a preface? What do you think of when organizational learning, right? The ability to cascade information. Why is it important? How do you ensure it? I don't know what comes to mind there.
Well, I mean, you certainly hit it in terms of mistakes, right? A lot of organizations recognize the mistakes that are made, but they're moving so fast that there's whatever learning is not captured. So then perhaps they're making the same mistake over and over again.
Yeah.
Well, that's not the point of organizational learning as part of your culture, right?
Yeah.
And then if you tie organizational learning back to capability development and are we investing in our people, it's like, there is no thing called org that has a brain that's learning. It's us, it's people. And so, and it's also, what are we learning? Are we learning that, wow, I thought we were more compassionate than we really are. I thought, this, or I thought that, whatever it is. So to me, the notion of org learning really centers on all of what we just talked about and what we talked about in the previous, 2 episodes. And it's all integrated. And, if the learning is integrated and it becomes a part of the culture, the last thing I'd say is when something new comes up, which is to some degree what has been happening over and over and over again for the last 19 months, our initial response is to try to learn about it. It's not to shut down about it or get fearful about it or pretend that it's not happening or climate change can't happen here.
Yeah.
Or, that kind of, so it's setting the culture of valuing learning.
Yes. Yeah. Good stuff. So let's transition. I alluded to it earlier, and if you've been with us for a few episodes, we end every episode with our Let's Get Practical. This is our list of things that you can begin to think about and implement in your business to start making positive inroads in the area that we've been talking about. So in this case, we're talking about the people aspect. What can you do in your organization to help grow and develop the people side of your business so that can be a real positive input into your organization culture? And how do you grow and develop your organization's ability to roll with the changes, right? To adapt, to learn, to not just react, but to proact, right? That's leading change isn't reactive, it's proactive. In fact, how do you get others to follow your lead? And how do you then become known? Why would you want to do that? So that your organization becomes part of the story people tell about your company. and culture lives in the stories that people tell. We've said that in previous
Right.
episodes. So when you think about, based on what we talked about today, or any other thoughts that the two of you have, my wise culture colleagues, what are your thoughts for what our listener can begin to think about and do tomorrow to make inroads in these areas?
Want to start, Patsy?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I think so. If I'm a frustrated CEO or I'm a leader, I am going to look at are we investing in our people? Are we investing in learning? And it's not just money; it's also growth oriented, and it's also will they have the time? Are we really truly giving people the ability to learn and grow? So I think that's a practical step. I think, relooking at the culture of teams and, recognizing, it, are we calling some teams that are work groups, and, teams have a common goal, and are they functioning well or not? And with the intent of having the culture support teamwork. I think empowerment came up. Patsy brought it up really well about especially if you're onboarding in a virtual world and you haven't even truly met some of the people that you're working with. Clarity on roles and responsibilities and what you have, what decisions you can make, and what authority that you have. And there's more, but I'll just say one more. I think information flow is really important, and leaders have the ability to do something about that. How many times have we heard someone say, "Well, if I'd only known that, I would have made a different decision."
Yeah.
Right. And that's really important, and it can be really frustrating for the leader, but it can also really be frustrating for a team leader or someone on a team who wasn't informed and thought they could have been or should have been. So I think there's some practical steps there.
That's great. Patsy, what do you got?
Well, I'm struck by some of the behaviors or core skills that we've mentioned, which may seem counterintuitive. Be curious. Listen with an open heart, so really connect. And be empathetic. Those are not three core behaviors or skills that we usually associate with business, and they are really foundational and transformational.
Love
the
that.
other is the opposite of the spectrum. Accept that culture is a living, breathing organism. It has to be tended to on a daily basis to keep it alive, to build it, to enhance it. So those are my two.
Love it. Good. You guys covered a lot of mine. I only have, I think, 3 to add. One is, and Leb, this continues. This has come up in previous episodes. You talk a lot about organizational beliefs. And I thought it was eloquent today what you were saying, organizational learning. What am I learning, not just from our mistakes, what am I learning about our culture? Because culture lives in the stories that people tell. And so I think it's important. And you've also said this, getting to the beliefs is some of the hardest work there is to do, because people don't wear them on their sleeves. Sometimes they're right there. You have to initiate conversation and create space for people to put those beliefs out there. So in terms of let's get practical, do that hard work to identify what are the beliefs in this organization. Specifically, we're talking about it in terms of change. What are your organization's beliefs about change? And where are those beliefs serving you well? And where do they need to be challenged and potentially changed so that they're not holding you back anymore? That's one. Second is we're talking about leaders needing to evolve and change and grow themselves. because the environment has changed. The landscape, the leadership landscape has changed. And how you led 18 months ago isn't going to work anymore. And finally, and this is that organizational learning piece, that learning from our mistakes, slow down and make sure that you're sharing the learning of the learnings from the organization's mistakes, because mistakes are great when we learn from them, but they're not so great when we continually repeat them. That's where we're just banging our heads into a collective wall. So any other last ones that come to mind that you want to add to that list?
I think you nailed it.
I do too.
I think we nailed it.
Good
Yes.
to go.
Yeah. Great job. I thank you both for your wisdom, your insights. Thank you, listener, for joining us. This wraps up our 3-part series on fixing dysfunctional culture. We've kind of given you a sense of where to start and the bigger aspects of your organization to be considering, to be looking at, thinking about. And at the end of each episode, we've given you practical steps that you can take to really impact and influence those major areas of your business. So the only thing left for you to do is do something, start, right? And don't do it all at once. Pick something and go. And remember, as we talked about a couple episodes ago, it's a journey. It's a long-term journey where you'll see some short-term results, but you can't expect a high-performance organization in 6 months or even sometimes 12 months. That's a long-term journey. That's it. If you've liked this episode, we'd love a review on any of the podcast libraries. That'd be great. Tell us what you think. Tell us how we can improve. Tell us what topics you want us to be covering. Don't forget, if you want to download this episode's Let's Get Practical, the list we just walked through, you can find that on our website at at thefrustratedceo.com. You can also email any of us. You can contact any of us at our first names at thefrustratedceo.com. So you can reach Patsy at thefrustratedceo.com, at thefrustratedceo.com, Leb at thefrustratedceo.com, and myself at Patrick at thefrustratedceo.com. And then tune in to future episodes. We'll continue to try to address the issues that are keeping you, our frustrated CEOs, awake at night so that we can alleviate those and help you sleep. I think that's it. Any final words?
Thank you, Patrick.
Bye.
Thank you both.
Patrick.
All right. We'll see you again in the future. Bye-bye.
Bye.